Welcome to another episode of 3D Art Show with Gabe. I'm your host, Gabe, and I'm very excited that today is our very first episode where we're doing a deep dive into the Unreal Engine 5 game engine. That is an incredible game engine that essentially allows anyone to become a video game developer. Now, joining me today, I have an 18-year video game industry veteran, Nathan Purkeypile, formerly of Bethesda Studios, who has worked on such games as Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout 76. He has worked on Metroid Prime. He's worked on Skyrim, just to name a few. And for the better part of these last couple of years, Nathan has left Bethesda Studios and worked on his own indie game using the Unreal Engine 5, as well as a few other things such as Blender and Houdini, and using some VR 3D sculpting. And I'm joined here today by Nate to talk about his new project. Nate, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to talking about it.
Awesome. First thing I wanted to ask you is, for our guests who are not familiar with what you're working on, can you give us the brief elevator pitch for an audience that's never heard of the Axis Unseen?
Sure. The Axis Unseen is a heavy metal horror game where you hunt monsters from folklore. And it's closer to like a hunting simulator. And you're using your bow and like following their tracks. But unlike regular hunting games where, if, say, a deer sees you and it runs off into the woods, this is all monsters, so they come and eat your face.
Awesome. Very good. And actually, I'd like to go and show a little preview of it. Hey, Amanda, can you put one of the videos on that shows a little bit of game footage from the Axis Unseen?
See if it hears something, and we'll go and check that out. Like, it's going to the tracks, but then if I shoot over there, it's going to hear that. Hey, look over there. See, so you can distract them in that way. It will just keep following my tracks as I go. Now you can also see that the wind is pointing in this direction, so it's actually smelling me as well. So it matters not just where you walk and what tracks you leave, but what direction the wind is going and where the creature is. So if I want it to stop smelling me, I would want to get away from that wind direction. Here you can see, since I'm not downwind of it, the wind is going this way. It doesn't actually hear me. It's just seeing my tracks. And also, things leave blood trails. So I shot it with an arrow, and it's going to go running off. It will leave all these tracks, but then periodically it will bleed. So you can follow all the tracks and the blood and see where it went. There's one way to go here. See, it keeps leaving more. If it sees me again, it will run away. Over here you can see a bunch of test areas I have set up to see how your arrows and your footprints react to things. Like, this is a stone thing, so if I shoot it, an arrow will break. If I shoot the dirt, that will stick, and I can get it back. But the arrow, when I shoot it against stone, it's also louder, so the creature might hear it more. So you can decide, is it worth wasting an arrow? But you might do a better job of distracting it. Same with if I walk on these. This will make a louder sound, but it doesn't leave footprints. So, like, do I think it's close enough to hear me? You have to decide that.
I want to ask you, first and foremost, for our viewers, where can they support you on this? Where can they find out more about this game?
I mean, the best thing is to wishlist the Axis Unseen on Steam, but you can also follow me on Twitter at @NPurkeypile, and the Steam page has links to all my other socials if you want to find me there. And there's also a link to a Discord.
Very good. Awesome. Next part of the show, I'd like to especially talk about how you used Unreal Engine 5. That is a massive tool. In fact, it's a tool. It's a toolkit, really, and it's got a whole bunch of tools within it, like Nanite and Lumen and Quixel, Mixer, Megascans, and all those things. So I want to ask you a little bit about how you used all these tools in Unreal 5. I guess the first thing I'll ask you is, for those who have also never heard of it, what is Unreal 5?
Unreal 5 is a game engine. It's essentially like a framework that lets me make a game without having to code everything from scratch. So it has a lot of those tools in place to make a game. It's not like it's going to make it for you, but I don't have to make my own, say, like AI system. I just customize it for how it works for me.
Nice. Yesterday, actually, I did a deep dive on Wikipedia into the origins of Unreal. I think it goes back to 1998, something like that. And there was actually a first-person shooter game called Unreal. And then from there, I believe it was just developed as an engine and became what it is today with Unreal Engine 5. So pretty incredible game. And I did watch an older interview with you, Nate, where you talked about how what you do as a solo indie game developer would not be possible 10 years ago. What are some of the things that you do now that you just couldn't imagine back, in say 2005?
I mean, back then, doing like an open world game in particular, that was a very specialized thing, and most engines couldn't do that. And even if you were going to do that, you need like a whole team to do it. So, especially with Unreal 5, they've made their tools for like open world stuff a lot better. And with stuff like Nanite and Lumen, you can do a lot more without having to have like, say, a whole server farm to then bake light maps for your open world game. Like, that can take months. And you just don't even need to do that step anymore. So things like that help a lot.
I'd like to dive into a little bit into those actual tools. So the word nanite, interesting word. Can you tell us a little bit about that tool and how you used it?
The best way to think of nanite is almost infinite geometry. Like in older games, like not even old, like with the recent ones, instead of having actual detail in all the models, there's a thing called a normal map, where you have like a simpler model and it makes it look like there's more detail than this actually there. But with nanite, it tries to render just what it needs to, which is basically one triangle per pixel. So what you end up getting is millions and millions, even trillions of polys that get sort of decimated on the fly to render what you need. So I can just take incredibly detailed models straight from like ZBrush and put it straight in the game. Like one model with nanite is more than the entire scene in Skyrim.
Now, I think we even saw a little picture of this in the clip from earlier. Can you tell us some of the creatures that you made with nanite? I mean, the answer might be everything, but like any for examples?
Unfortunately, it doesn't support things that sort of have soft deformation, like, muscles and things like that. But anything that's rigid, you can do with nanite. So the tree golem that I built, that's built out of a whole bunch of different logs that are sort of assembled and put on a little rig that I animated.
Okay, incredible. How old is nanite is a new feature with Unreal Engine 5? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That seems like such a radical paradigm shift. I think after this interview, I'll be doing my next deep dive onto the history of nanite. Actually, it just sounds fascinating,
Yeah, it has origins in some similar stuff that you might have seen in like the Rage game from id. They had a thing called mega texture, which is essentially infinite textures where the whole world could be custom with like spray paint and graffiti everywhere. So it's like taking that idea and just moving it a step forward into geometry.
Nice. So there's some relation to nanite and to megascans. I follow you on TikTok, and for our listeners, I'm going to encourage you to follow Nate on TikTok, because what's really cool is he shows in his earlier TikTok videos basically an under-the-hood look at the development of this game. You see all kinds of things, like how he coded the game mechanics and the visual limitations of the enemies, and how he does the smell mechanics. There's one TikTok in particular where you talk about how you used megascans for that tree golem. You used both nanite and megascans. This shows my ignorance of the two and how they're used. Can you explain what megascans are and how you used them in that tree golem?
Megascans is pretty much just a collection of photogrammetry stuff from this company called Quixel. So they've gone out and taken a bunch of cameras and taken pictures of rocks and trees and all this stuff, and they have these incredibly detailed models that you can then use. And now with nanite, instead of it being the simplified version, you're bringing in like the raw scan data, which is super detailed. And maybe it's just me, but doing more rocks for video games seems like a waste of time. So instead, I can use these Megascans assets, but then I stylize them for my game, where it's a lot more graphic in the way it's presented. And that way it doesn't look like just another photorealistic game.
Nice, very cool. One of the questions I have for you is, for a lot of our viewers, they may just be starting with Unreal Engine 5, or maybe they'll want to after they start this. I know that you have a lot of experience as a game developer. How long did it take for you to feel comfortable with Unreal Engine 5?
I mean, I'm always learning new stuff as I do it now, but I spent the first, couple months doing a lot more tutorials than actually working. But it was pretty quick to pick it up. And they have like really good resources where there's all these like video tutorials, and they even have one where you get like achievements and little badges for every tutorial you do. So that's the nice thing about using an engine that like hundreds, if not thousands of people are using, is there's a lot of resources out there. Like if I ever run into a problem, I can just be like, how does such and such work in Unreal? And probably someone else ran into that.
Nice. That's incredible. That's how it's gone for me at work this past year. I've been a model developer for a year and a month now, and it's been an incredible journey. I absolutely love it. But every single day, there's not a day where probably a quarter of my entire day isn't just on tutorials. But, I've learned so much. So that's kind of how you got to stay sharp, in this industry. So I certainly relate to that. All right. So there is one video, and I think it's on your YouTube, actually. There may be smaller snippets available on your TikTok, but it is a summary of the first 6 months of your game development. I was actually hoping as part of this interview, we could watch it. It only has music. It doesn't have any narration. But then after we watch it together, you can talk about some of it and how far you've come since that video aired. Amanda, if you want to air that video, that'd be great. Wow, there's a lot going on there, a lot. In fact, I might even give you the floor here, and if you could tell us a little bit about what we're seeing there.
So that first 6 months was me building out the prototype of the game and all of the systems so that I could play for like an hour or so in that small level and figure out whether it was actually possible for me to make this game. Because my background is in art, so the question on if I could make like a giant open world, that part wasn't really the question. It was if I could do all the systems and work with Unreal and figure out how long each of those things takes. And so that went really well, actually. Every single one of my estimates I ended up beating because Unreal's been really great to work with. But that let me sort out all the metrics for how much I could build for the full game and sort out like the full schedule.
In that video, I see a lot of the testbed things happening as well. That's actually part of another video, which we may not show later. But there's the testbed. There's also sculpting, and I think the sculpting was from sculpting in VR. Is that right?
Yeah, I do most of my sculpting in VR. I do a little bit of like fine detail work after the fact in ZBrush, but all of the major forms I do that in VR, and I find it to be dramatically faster. Like that first creature took me a few days, but now I can pretty much make a whole creature in a day.
Okay, that's incredible to me. So I have a fair amount of experience sculpting in I use Blender. I have access to ZBrush, but I learned Blender first, the free one. I'm not at a stage yet myself where I know the difference between sculpting in Blender and sculpting in ZBrush, despite ZBrush being the industry standard. So, having heard
it's a lot less confusing. That's the difference.
Oh, okay. Nice. Fair enough. What equipment do you use for your VR? What headset?
I just use the Quest 2, and then I plug it into my PC, which is actually my laptop is what I use most of the time. So I can just fit that all in a backpack and take it anywhere. Like I've done a lot of sculpting out in the middle of the woods and stuff. And like you can do the air link thing and not do wireless, but I like the reliability. And frankly, if I'm sculpting, I'm not like spinning around and jumping, so the wire doesn't really bother me in that case.
Nice, incredible. Okay, I mean, also with sculpting, when I first learned, I used a mouse, and then obviously soon after, I moved to a tablet, and that was a whole world of difference. So you alluded to this earlier, and you spoke a little bit about it, but I was hoping to hear a bit more. So sculpting in VR is just completely different, even from sculpting with a tablet. Is that right?
Yeah, because you still have the pressure aspect of a tablet, but it's so much easier to get just the exact right angles. Like, say I'm sculpting a monster's teeth or its tongue. Like, that is a total nightmare normally to get just the right angle and get in there. But in VR, you're just like, oh, it's right there, and this is the shape, and you're done.
Nice. Maybe I'll have to buy that for my work. Actually, I can I can do that. So I'll use your endorsement and see if I can get my hands on one. So that's pretty cool. That's cool. So other things that you've used, also Houdini. That is a software that in the 3D modeling community, people love it, but they're also very, very scared of it. Can you tell us, for those who don't know, if you don't mind me asking you one of these questions, can you tell us what Houdini is and then how you have used it?
So Houdini is a completely different way to make everything, where it's all node-based procedural stuff. So some people use it for everything, but it is definitely, I can see why people are scared of it, because like when I started to learn it, it was like, here's the quick intro to Houdini, and it was like an 8-hour playlist, and none of the terminology is the same as anything else, so it's definitely not easy. But I used it mostly for terrain generation, so I would basically sort of block out my terrain, but then run all these erosion simulations on it to make it look more natural, so I'm not just having to like sculpt erosion myself. And I did try, in the videos you can see, like placing trees and stuff like that, so that I could automate that, but that workflow is not like super solid yet in Unreal, so I ended up doing that part by hand. So it's mostly for the terrain. Okay,
very good. Yeah, and for our viewers, I'm more of an artist myself. I like to paint and I like to build in Blender. I've used Adobe Substance Painter, which is very artist friendly, and then there's Adobe Substance Designer, which again, it's node based. And I don't want anyone to be scared of Houdini, but again, I am. So for those who want to learn more about it, obviously you can watch a few YouTubes about it. And those who are really into programming may enjoy it. Last question I had for you. I know that you used Blender a little bit in this game. Can you tell us about how you've used Blender?
Yeah, I use Blender for basically anything that I'm not able to do in the other software. So I use it to do my animation and to just export the models into the game and to often clean up the stuff from VR a little bit, because the way it comes out of VR, since it's kind of, you're like sculpting volumes, so what ends up happening is you have all these weird shapes on the inside of the monsters. But that's really hard to get rid of in VR, and it's really easy in Blender because I can just be like, select everything on the outside, invert the selection, delete it. So having some traditional modeling tools is really helpful sometimes.
Nice, awesome, very good, very good. All right, so for this next part of the interview, I'm really excited that we're going to talk about less about the tools used to make the game and more about the actual game mechanics itself. So regarding game mechanics, I have a whole list here of things that I've watched from your videos, all kinds of things here. Do you have a favorite game mechanic that you're most proud of?
I think I like the smell-o-vision, whatever you want to call it, where you can track the creatures by scent, and it's not just them smelling you, but you can smell them once you get that power.
Awesome, very good. I don't think I've ever seen a game, and again, I haven't played all the games out there, obviously, but I'm not aware of any game that uses scent in any way at all. Is this the first game that you're aware of that does scent?
I mean, I can't think of any case where the player does it.
Okay, nice. Very cool. One of the ones that really stuck out to me is the heartbeat that you alluded to in a few of your videos. Can you tell us a little bit about the heartbeat?
Yeah, I thought since I'm making a horror game, it would be cool to basically simulate your heart rate, and also to help encourage you to not just be like sprinting around the whole time. So it made sense to me for if you like start sprinting or holding your bow back, if you get hurt, or even if a monster sees you, all of these things can increase your heart rate, which can then like change your vision to like start to constrict towards the middle. And I even have different sound channels. So like small ambient sounds, those can just drop out completely. Something like a footstep that could get muffled, but then, say, creature roar, that comes through clear, because it's like your senses are focused on these things and dropping out what it doesn't need. And it also works with all the powers in the game, so like your smell-o-vision and stuff, that doesn't work if you're just sprinting through the woods, you know. So you have to like stop, and then if you stop for a second, you can hear your character like take a breath, and then your vision goes back to normal, and all your powers start to come back.
Nice. Very cool. I also know that from past interviews, you talked about how one of your goals with this game is to make it as close to life as possible. Can you tell us about like your ammo? How do you know if you're low on ammo, and how have you used that same philosophy in other areas?
Yeah, I find it's kind of a crutch in games to do everything with UI, so you're ending up with all these menus everywhere and counters, and I just like the really immersive nature of stuff that doesn't do that. So I thought it'd be interesting, like, hey, how many arrows do I have? Let me pull out my quiver and check. What about leveling up? You like go to altars in the world. Or even if you're finding lore in the world, instead of pulling up, again, another menu, you like pull out a physical book that exists in the world, and it's the lighting in the world affects it. Flip through the pages of that. I just like being grounded in that way.
Nice, incredible. And I think I actually asked you this in your Discord. By the way, for all of our listeners, Nate has a Discord. If you search for the Axis Unseen on Discord, you can find it and ask Nate questions yourself or anyone else in his community. It's very cool. One of the questions I think I asked you, Discord or Twitter, was about that book. When you open up the book, in the Fallout games, if you turn on your what's the Pip-Boy, the computer, I think the outside world pauses. That is not the case in the Axis Unseen. Is that right?
That is currently not the case.
Okay.
I could do that if it's annoying, but I don't know. I kind of like the tension of
Yeah.
that. Like, nobody's sitting there hunting monsters in the forest, and then they just start flipping through a book. Like, you gotta watch out.
Cool. That'll certainly add a whole lot more challenge. Do you plan on doing an easy mode and a hard mode, or is there just the one mode that you're making?
I think that just depends on how playtesting goes, but I do plan on probably doing like a pacifist mode, because I even have a lot of that stuff just for testing the game myself, where the creatures don't detect you anymore. Put in a photo mode for anybody that just wants to be like a monster tourist. Like, why not?
Oh, yeah, totally. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. There was a question that I didn't ask you about Unreal Engine 5 that I wanted to, and it would be back in the previous section, but I'm still curious. With all of your past game experience and what you've done with the Unreal Engine, is there anything that is currently not in Unreal that you would like to see in future iterations?
I think the one, like, now that they have basically infinite geometry, the one thing that always causes problems still is like what we call like particle overdraw, like smoke and stuff. So I would like the equivalent of nanite, but for particles, where you could have infinite smoke and fog and all that without the game running like garbage. Because it is very easy to make games run poorly by doing that.
Interesting. Nice. Wow. That's cool. I'd like to ask that question to a lot of folks and see if other folks are in agreement on there. Okay, let's see. Other game mechanics. Footprints. Those are pretty cool. So yeah, this is also, again, I haven't seen a whole lot of games utilize footprints, but if you walk on hard surfaces like concrete, you don't have footprints, but if you walk through mud, you leave footprints, which the animals can detect. Is that right? Nice.
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like that will add a whole lot to the strategy. Gosh, before we move on to our next section, anything else in terms of gameplay mechanics that you'd like to discuss with either the player or the environment or the enemies?
One of the things I wanted to do also was to dig deep with the mechanics. So the bow has like all the different elemental arrow types, but I didn't want those to just be straight up like, oh, there's a fire arrow, so it does fire damage and that's it. Instead, you can mix them together to be like, shoot a fire arrow down on the ground, but then shoot a wind arrow and make a giant flame wall. So they all combine together in these different ways.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. Wow, that's actually really cool. The only time I've seen any kind of combining, I think, was one of the two games I played in 2017. One of them was Fallout. The other game was Final Fantasy. That's all I played, because when you're a grown-up, you're very limited on time. I liked in that game, though, how you're able to combine like if you had, an ice spell and enemies that were weak to ice or whatever, you could add anything to it in your inventory, anything at all, like a claw, a venomous claw. Now you've got poison plus ice damage, things like that. So it forced you to think outside the box, and forced you to. I mean, basically, it gave you a lot more options in terms of building your offenses. So that's pretty cool. That's cool. And you also have a time arrow, I believe, one that slows down time. Is that right?
Yeah, whatever is caught in the bubble, time slows down. So you can trap a creature with it, or if that creature is really strong, you could just shoot it right in front of yourself and like shoot a bunch of arrows into it. And then when the bubble goes away, all those arrows fly at once. So you could shoot something with like 10 arrows all at once.
Oh, nice, incredible, nice. One other question about the development of the game. What are some of the biggest changes, unexpected changes from your original vision to where you are now?
Well, the very, very first pitch that I had for the game was going to hell in hunting monsters. So that it is not what the game is now, but that was kind of like the start of that idea. Because in general, it was just like, I want a hunting game with monsters. And that was the first thing that came to mind. But then I started thinking more about the environment and, I don't know, folklore in a bit more of like a primitive setting seemed more fun to me.
Nice. Okay, very cool. And actually, that exactly segues into our next section. This whole section here is on game lore and your artistic inspiration. So one thing I want to ask you about the game itself is, what is the setting, the time and place of the game?
So it's kind of a world outside of time, and that's sort of alluded to in lots of different cultures as like the other world, or like the world tree, where there's this place that's connecting all of the different places around the world. And that's the core fictional conceit of like, why is it that everyone has Sasquatch myths like all over the world? Why is that? Well, the answer is there's this world full of monsters connecting everything, and sometimes those monsters escape out into the real world. And so now you're in this world exploring and finding out where they come from and hunting those creatures.
Nice, very cool. I know that as part of your research into the game, you've asked a lot of your followers suggestions for characters from lore from all throughout the world. I would love to hear about some of the most fascinating creatures and unexpected creatures that you found in your research into lore.
Oh, it could be like an infinite list of creatures that I do, but it has been really interesting to me seeing when there are those similarities. So often when I do pick a creature, I'll be like, this one is this creature and this creature and this creature and this creature, because those are all kind of the same thing. And it's like people are all telling stories about the same thing.
Interesting.
But I would say that the ones that are the most interesting and unique are like the Japanese monsters are really, really interesting. Like there's a lot of ones that are not like anything else. Like there's the Kappa, which is a turtle that has water in like this bowl in its head. And if you cause them to bow, then the water falls out and they get like incapacitated. There's just some really interesting stuff.
Wow, interesting. Any good sources for our listeners and viewers to learn more about lore?
I can't think of them offhand.
Okay. If you do later, we'll include those in the show notes. So
sure.
Yeah. So very cool. Now, on your Discord, there is one channel about movies, and you have 2 movies listed in the very beginning that really informed or that really inspired you in certain ways. Can you tell us about those movies and how they inspired your vision for your game?
One of them was The Ritual, which is, I think, on Netflix, and that one was really cool, and I just like the feeling of like being in the woods and having like this grounded folklore, just the whole like gritty nature of that movie. And it's not trying to be like cheesy and jump scares. So I really like that one a lot. And the other was The Headhunter, which I wouldn't actually say is an inspiration because I had already started the game, but I started watching that movie and I was like, oh, that's kind of like what I'm building, where a lot of the storytelling in that movie is also like very implied. It's not like this is the world and this is what's going on, cue narration. It's like one guy out in the woods hunting monsters and he doesn't really even have contact with most people. He just gets like these contracts from monsters to go hunt. And that movie was amazing. And it was also made for like $30,000 or something like that. It was done, but it doesn't look cheap at all. So like they did a fantastic job with that movie.
Nice. Very cool. Where do you hear about all your movies like The Headhunter and the other one that you had mentioned? I mean, like they're not on Netflix, are they?
I mean, The Ritual was on Netflix, but The Headhunter, I think I just pay attention to what movies people are talking about and look at like best of horror lists and see what crops up.
Nice. Very cool. Okay. Now here's the fun part. I have heard this story many times before, but I have to ask you this story again because our listeners and our viewers would love to hear it. The music, the soundtrack for this game. Tell us about who wrote it and how you got in touch with this person.
So one of the first things I was deciding when I was making the game was the music, and I knew I wanted it to be a heavy metal game. And ideally, I was thinking, well, if I could get anybody to do the music, it would be this band, Isis, that I listened to for ages. And they're like this awesome post-metal band, and listened to them for 20 years. And so I just found their Bandcamp page and just sent them an email just out of the blue. Just like, hey, I worked on Skyrim and stuff, and I'm making this game. Do you license your music? And I actually heard back, and the answer was yes. They do license their music, and I am using some of it in the game. But then the guy that I talked to, Clifford Meyer, he also was a fan of Skyrim, and he's a gamer and stuff. And he asked, am I looking for anyone to do music for my game? And so we got to chatting, and he sent along some samples, and it was just exactly what I was looking for. The first sample track he sent is actually ended up becoming my intro. When I announced the game, that music, it was from that very first sample. So he was really great to work with, and now I have a full 90-minute score of tons of different tracks from him.
I'm very, very much moved by music. In fact, whenever I do art, I always have a playlist playing in the background. Most recently, it's been violin and piano covers of my favorite heavy metal. Mostly for myself, it's been a whole lot of Tool, Lateralis, Metallica, and all of it done in either strings or a whole symphony orchestra. Do you have favorite music in general that you listen to while you're creating?
I mean, besides ISIS, I would say the number one thing that I listen to when making games has been Boards of Canada. So I just like the chill feel of that, and it's just something I can listen to over and over. Yeah, I love that band.
Very cool, very cool. All right, so one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is I know that on Twitter you've posted a lot of your AI artwork, or rather artwork that you've created using Midjourney. What got you interested in AI art?
I just thought it was a really interesting way to play with concepts without having to, I'm terrible at drawing, frankly, and so it's just a nice way to find reference and make mood boards and stuff. I'm not using that stuff directly in the game, but instead of me spending an hour Googling different, say I'm making a deer monster and I just end up with a bunch of gross deer pictures, I can try out different things in Midjourney, see what sort of shapes end up there. I knew a concept artist once where the way he designed monsters is he would actually just take ink and throw it on the page and then mirror that and then draw over that to make monsters.
Oh, wow.
And it's kind of like that for me, where it's staring at the clouds and seeing what shapes end up there. Nice. And none of my creatures even end up looking exactly like that, but it can give me ideas of it'd be cool if the beak was shaped like this, or the claws are this way.
Nice, I like that. So in that way, it's kind of the same as just going through any board at all, but instead of art that exists in its entirety, it's artificial intelligence that compiles images from a bunch of sources. So yeah, that's very cool. I have played with Midjourney myself, and I've had a blast with it. It's been both terrifying and enlightening. I found it's very much a luck of the draw. I got my favorite prompt from you, actually. Again, we were talking on Discord, and I was expressing my frustrations that I wasn't getting anything good out of Midjourney. And I think you gave me the idea of a prompt, something with a humanoid creature. In your case, I think it was a humanoid creature made out of bones in the desert or something of that sort.
Yeah, that checks out.
Yeah. I have a few that I had a ton of fun with Midjourney. And again, for our viewers who want to try Midjourney, if you download the Discord app, and just so many apps nowadays with Discord, you make yourself a profile and then you log in. And if you find Midjourney's channel, you can make a prompt by just typing /imagine and then anything you want. So in my case, I took Nate's idea of a humanoid creature, and I think my first one was I did a humanoid creature made out of spaghetti and meatballs, and then I just ran with it. I did a humanoid creature made out of scribbles. I did a humanoid creature made out of car parts. And every single time I've used Humanoid Creature, I've loved what I've gotten. It's been terrifying and amazing at the same time. I also experienced a lot with rainbow colors, like I did a giant spider made out of rainbows. And, it gave me that image. And it's not exactly what I asked for, like made out of rainbows. I didn't know if it would be like an effervescent, like a see-through spider. So in that case, what it did is it just made a traditional spider, but rainbow colored. So that worked as well. And also, I had in my Discord, one of the users was doing a gorgeous female fairy from the heavens. And he kept doing gorgeous female fairy. So, of course, I had to do my thing, and I said, a gorgeous female fairy made out of car parts. And it was really cool. It was like this steampunk mechanical fairy. And then I did a gorgeous female fairy made out of neon splatter paint. That one was really good, too. So, yeah, I've had a whole lot of fun with it. It's been a total blast, actually. So yeah. So, gosh, and actually, that's the end of my notes. So we've got some free time here. So I'd also like to ask you about some of your memories working at Bethesda and other game studios, and how building games has changed over the last 15 years. I know I'm a big fan of how have things changed questions, but they're still very relevant. You know what I mean? Like you worked originally on Metroid Prime 3, and I know that the philosophy of how you built things changed drastically, since then. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, like the way the Metroid games are built is almost the complete opposite of the way the Bethesda games are built, because every single room in the Metroid games was handcrafted, every single intersection and everything. So I would get like a month per room, and I would be lucky to get like, I don't know, an hour on a room on a Bethesda game.
Yes.
But the way that the Bethesda games are built is a lot more kit-based. And, it's like Lego kits, only fancier. And I think that's a better way to work, honestly, because I think it's better to spend time on what makes a place different, as opposed to, oh, this trim goes into the dirt just like that. Like, nobody actually cares about that part. You end up spending a lot of time on very, very similar stuff by doing that bespoke way. So I think there's a nice sort of medium there.
Nice. Very cool. In fact, with Metroid, isn't it, is it the 30th anniversary of Metroid Prime? No, it's not 30th. 20th anniversary? I'm not that old.
20th sounds right. Yeah, I don't think I'm that old. Yeah.
I'm not that old, yeah. And I know that Twitter has just been lighting up recently with stories of game developers from Metroid. And there was one of them that you recommended. Can you recommend any friends on Twitter to follow who worked on Metroid with you?
Yeah, I mean, there's Jack Matthews, and Zoid is what most people know him by. He was the guy that did the original Quake CTF, and he was at Retro for a while. He's put out a bunch of stories, I think, as part of that anniversary. Yeah,
that's been very cool. So for those of you who played Metroid Prime or would like a behind-the-scenes look, go to or follow Zoid on Twitter. It's a fun name. I wonder why he chose that name. So.
One of those original, handles back in the Quake days. Who knows?
Yeah. Very cool. Alrighty. So, do you have any cool glitch stories that you can share? I know when we interviewed you on Breaking Math, even though that episode never actually aired, you shared a couple of really cool glitch stories. I'd love to hear about a few of those, even ones that you haven't shared before, if you can think of those.
I mean, I can think of one I haven't really talked about from '76, and it was these like possessed cars that made me think of like that John Carpenter movie where the car is like chasing the people. But in this case, what would happen is like, as you kept moving around the world, and I still to this day don't know why, two cars would just fall out of the sky and crash like right next to you. And it wasn't like, because normally it would be like, oh, you go into a cell and like somebody put a tin can in the wrong spot, and that tin can is going to freak out. But it's in a spot. But in this case, it was like they were stalking you across the world and trying to kill you. And that even did happen sometimes where it would actually like fall on some creatures near you or hit you. And it was just the weirdest thing. Like, especially with working with online games, it's so hard to know what's going on and why. And sometimes stuff, it just gets disconnected. So people even see different things. Like, you would get attacked by invisible creatures.
Wow.
Like, all sorts of stuff happens.
Nice. Fallout 4 and Final Fantasy 15 were the only games that I played in all of 2017. I don't know how adults have time for more than one RPG at a time. I just don't. especially if you have kids. Even, since I've had kids, I've played basically none. By the time I have free time, I just fall asleep and I'm tired. Nonetheless, Fallout 4 was immensely impactful for both my wife and myself. I had actually given up games completely for a period of about 10 years. I think it was when the original Halo came out. And around that time, I graduated high school, and for some reason I felt a little bit lost and depressed, I think. And I was with some friends who were obsessed with Halo, and I saw that as not moving forward in life, as being stuck in like video games. So I was like, you know what? I'm giving up. I quit. I'm not doing any of these games for 10 years. And I did cross country, and I got in shape, and I learned guitar, which are all very, very cool things. But I completely missed all of game development for a 10-year period. And it was my wife, when I married her in 2015, she introduced me to Fallout. And we didn't have kids yet. And seeing the development in 10 years, I compared it to like a classic novel. It's so immersive. I mean, as soon as I could figure out that you can, build weapons or build clothing or build, anything like that from anything around you, I was just instantly hooked. It was amazing. So, I think it's really cool that I have the opportunity to interview somebody who worked on the Fallout series. Sorry for that long rant, but that kind of informs my current relationship with gaming in general. I no longer think it's a waste of time at all. I love it. No, really, like it's come a long time. Now, don't get me wrong. There are games that I think are probably a more of a waste of time, but as you increase their complexity and you increase the choice from the users, there's just so much that you can do. I love it. Okay, one question I want to ask. Fallout 4 has a long, winding storyline. Did you know the people who were responsible for the storyline in Fallout 4?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the team was not that big back then. Like, I don't know, 110 people or so. So
okay.
At that point, everybody on the team. It's not like Starfield. That's like 500 people or something. And I no longer knew everybody at that point.
During the game development process, how much did the storyline of Fallout 4 change? Like, is it pretty set in stone in the beginning planning stages, or did they change it on the fly like anything else?
I mean, stuff changes, but not sweeping changes. It's a little bit smaller, I think. A lot of the changes are a lot more gameplay oriented, especially because eventually you have to lock off the dialogue before the game is done in order to have time to do all of that voice recording. So they do have a thing called text lock, which is earlier than our art lock.
Very good, yeah. And now, with respect to the storyline and the plot, I loved it. I mean, it absolutely blew my mind the entire game. You're talking about this, the Institute. And then in the very, very end of the game, everyone's talking about how do you get into the Institute. And at this point, the game's pretty old, so we're going to spoil it. Well, in the very, very end, you have to hack into this dude's mind. And it's this whole game thing where you see his neurons and you get information from his head. Like, all of that imagination is fantastic. I don't know where they got that inspiration from, but it's phenomenal. Now, if that's not cool enough, you then find out that the Institute is impossible to get into unless you build a teleporter. You teleport in and out of the Institute. That was awesome. So if I had the opportunity to, I'd want to ask whoever wrote that, how did they think of that? That's mind-blowing. And obviously, I know that's not you, but if you happen to have insider knowledge, please let me know. I'm a huge fan of it.
Some of that might have been Emil. Some of it might have been Will Shen. I don't know. It's been a long time, but I did do the art for that sequence you're talking about where you're going through the memories. Like, I forgot I even did that until you mentioned it. I was like, oh, yeah, I did that. Then
how do you say that you're not a good artist? That was amazing. I mean, what do you call that if that's not doing amazing art?
I mean, that was just part of the game. Like, that game is so big, you end up doing so many different things. Like, a lot of that is just trying to do as much as you can in as little as time as possible.
Yeah. It's something else with the quality of that game that I think of when I compare that game to other games like Final Fantasy. I hate just mentioning those two. I'm sorry, I'm an expert in those two games, and that's all. But, the pacing of that game, and let me be specific. In the very first hour of the game, maybe the first 2 hours of the game, you not only see a nuclear explosion, that threatens all of society, but you also, when you wake up 200 some years later and you're exploring, you get a T-84 armor, I think, from a building, and you rescue some people, and immediately you're introduced to a Deathclaw that just climbs out of the ground. As I think either he pops open a sewer lid or he just like crawls out of a crack. I mean, I think Jonah Loeb would be very, very proud. Like that was an epic moment. I mean, just the action pacing was nonstop. That is not a game that takes a long time to get into. And it stays with you. So I guess, one of my questions was like with quality control, I mean, like, what goes into making a game great like that? Like, is there just a whole lot of test playing and seeing reactions, or they're just awesome, the gameplay?
Yeah, that part of the game had a lot more focus than most parts. And it was the same with Skyrim, where that intro, like, I don't even know how many times I've played both of those, easily hundreds, like, because I also did like the museum that you go through in the beginning of Fallout 4. So it just gets iterated on a lot, and a lot of the things that you figure out while building that inform making the rest of the game. Because that's kind of how you're able to make a game of that scale, is you figure out what works and how to do it, and you get faster and faster each time. Like, the amount of time the museum and the whole intro sequence took is dramatically higher than other things. And that's how we're able to like make the DLC so fast later, with stuff like Point Lookout and Far Harbor taking, like 4 months. Because you know what you're doing, you know the tools, and it's much, much faster.
That museum was incredible. You still had the tape playing 200 years later. That's amazing. Remember that? No, I'm just jabbing you. I mean, I love it though. Like you had all the mannequins, and I love the American patriotism. Like I was reading some Reddit boards on the history of the lore of Fallout, and I love how much hatred there is toward communism. Even that giant robot, I was going to call
Liberty Prime.
Not Optimus Prime, Liberty Prime. Maybe
Yeah.
they took the name from Optimus Prime. Maybe. I don't know.
Be.
This giant robot, and he throws mini nuclear bombs like a football. What's more American than that? Oh my God. But then just like, he wants to vanquish communism everywhere. You guys really captured the propaganda of 1950s, 60s, and Cold War. I love the propaganda. In fact, I wanted to wonder, what would it look like if they had like a hypothetical fallout from the opposite side, from the communist side? What would the lore and the propaganda and the technology and the stories look at? That would be kind of cool. Like who knows, Fallout Moscow or something like that. So fun stuff.
Yeah,
So
it'd be fun to see that. We touched very lightly on that stuff with like the hidden communist bases, and like that's actually something that I put into 76. Was there's this dungeon that got added in Wastelanders called the Deep, and that's the whole idea. Is basically there's this communist base under West Virginia, which obviously they would have,
yeah.
and they like hijacked the drills in the area to get around, and I kind of put in some references to maybe they'll keep drilling, maybe it could end up on the other side.
Oh man, cool. Oh man, that's awesome. Now that lore is not, I think that lore goes back to the days of when Fallout was an interplay game, right? Like it's something that Bethesda inherited, and obviously they did their own spin on it, but that lore is pretty consistent throughout the history of Fallout and the usage as a propaganda tool. So yeah, well, I loved it. One of the things I've also wanted to do with Fallout, since I'm an engineer on base, I work with a lot of, or next to a lot of nuclear engineers who are on the board of our local nuclear museum. We have, the Albuquerque Museum of Nuclear History that is a Smithsonian official museum. And in fact, I had my bachelor party there. Can you imagine a limousine pulled up with a bunch of guys who who were 3 sheets to the wind, talking about the history of science just with wild enthusiasm? That's what happened on my bachelor party. Now, since I know some people on the board, they've done some things with pop culture. They have a DeLorean prop from Back to the Future in the museum. Why? Well, it's loosely in some way affiliated with nuclear and the zeitgeist of our nuclear history. Well, if they can do that, they can probably do the same thing with, movies like Oppenheimer or the Fallout games from Bethesda or what's the other one? Chernobyl that came out on Netflix. So it's been kind of a goal of mine to see if they could have like a Fallout lore section there. So I'll see if I get around to that, but it would be pretty cool. So
That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. So we'll see. Anyways, that marks an hour for us. So before we wrap it, I want to give you an opportunity to plug anything you would like to, anything at all, including your own socials, obviously where we can get your game, your Discord where people can interact with you, or anything that you like in general or support.
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me on Twitter at @npurkeypile. I think my TikTok is the Axis Unseen, and Wishlist, the Axis Unseen on Steam. Those are the big things. And I don't know, I would just say support indie games in general. And people will talk about wishlisting, and there's a very good reason for that, because that's how Steam knows that people care about games. So if you ever see an indie game that you like, wishlist it. And that helps the almighty algorithm know that people think it's cool.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Algorithms. It's all about the algorithms. And yeah, for sure. So awesome. Well, Nate, thank you so much for joining us on 3D Art with Gabe. It's my passion to talk about 3D and digital art with other artists. So it's been a pleasure, and I've had a total fun time learning about your game and your philosophy, being part of the Discord community these last 4 months. So it's been great. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. We'll see you on Discord or on social media or elsewhere.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. All right. Well, we'll see you guys later.